It's Friday on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope everybody's having a great day out there today and a tremendous show coming up. We're going to touch on so many different sports here today and different leagues. Jon Marthaler joins me here in a little bit to talk Minnesota United soccer. The Loons open up on Saturday at LAFC. Home schedule starts a week from Saturday, ready or not. Loons are in a good spot this year, advanced a round in the playoffs last year. Is this the year they take a step forward? I think a question we ask about 80% of Minnesota teams going into any particular season, but certainly about Minnesota United this year. Got a good, thoughtful letter on Gophers men's basketball that I want to get to at the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? We're going to get to three things here. First off, a quick but notable mention of the Four Nations Face-Off, the hockey tournament that just ended, replaced the All-Star break, All-Star game in the NHL this season, and got to hand it to them. They nailed the format. Like, if you're going to have a pause in your season, and again, I'm not sure you should have a pause in your season, especially, I was thinking about this the other day, before we get to the Four Nations face-off. It's weird. The All-Star break is weird because you take, basically, in every sport that does a mid-year break, the NHL, Major League Baseball, NBA, WNBA, all of these leagues, even MLS, all of these leagues, basically, they give their best players have to work harder than everybody else. Say everybody who's really, really good, the best in the league, you don't get a break. Everybody else gets a longer break than you. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me when you're trying to market your product, when you're trying to talk about load management, stress management, everything like that. Does not make much sense to me. Maybe that's why a lot of these leagues are going towards diminished versions of their All-Star game. But the NHL kind of went the opposite way. They said, you know what, as long as we're going to take a break, we're going to make this mean something, put together the Four Nations face-off, the U.S., Canada, Finland, Sweden, a bunch of great hockey countries, comes down to the U.S. versus Canada for the championship on Thursday night. A tremendous game. Goes into overtime, and the only question we have of the overtime of the whole game played was, how does Connor McDavid get that open? Why are three guys chasing the puck, the passer, leaving Connor McDavid, one of the greatest snipers in the NHL, one of the greatest players in the NHL, wide open in the low slot? He settles it. He picks a corner. Game over. 3-2. Canada prevails. I didn't watch nearly as much of this tournament as some of you did, but I do agree that this was a good step, that this was a fun diversion. But if you're going to do it, break them into countries. I get it. That's fine. Get a little patriotism going. Get a little bit of country pride going. It's fine, even against this weird backdrop where, you know, we're talking about, is Canada going to become the 51st state, which, again, kind of distasteful discourse. I don't love the jokes being made, even though I've participated in that a little bit. Let's not go there with that. But there was a little bit of an extra edge to it. And of course, with the Olympics coming up next year, there's an extra edge to it. So congrats to the NHL. Congrats to hockey players for figuring out something that works in your all-star format. Now, on the flip side, NBA is back from its all-star break. The All-Star game was pretty lackluster, mediocre. They keep trying new formats, trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not working. Thank goodness they're back to the regular games. Wolves play tonight against Houston. Other teams were back in action a little earlier in the week, especially Thursday with a fuller slate of games. Here's the deal with the Wolves. They are right now in 7th place in the West, just barely. But if you look at their schedule, they have the easiest schedule of any team in the West for the rest of the season. That is according at least to Basketball Reference. They've played one of the hardest schedules so far, and they have the easiest schedule the rest of the way. If you look at their simple rating system, which assigns kind of keeps keeps the schedule you've played, strength of schedule, and point differential, things like that into consideration. The Wolves are the 5th best team in the West right now, and it's not really that close. They're the 8th best team in the NBA right now. Oh, by the way, not that far behind the New York Knicks, who we've been lauding is so much better than the Wolves this season. So I think there are a lot of wins left on their schedule if you go kind of game by game. It's going to be hard right out of the gate because they have hard games right away. Houston is good. Then you got 2 against Oklahoma City. You just beat Oklahoma City going into the break. They are going to want a little piece of you. So you've got a home and away, a back-to-back Sunday, Monday with Oklahoma City. Then you're at the Lakers. From February 28th to March 30th, though, listen to this schedule. At the Jazz, at the Suns, home against the 76ers, at Charlotte, at Miami, home against the Spurs, who just lost Wemby for the season, at Denver, or home against Orlando, home against Utah, home against Indiana, 2 straight at home against New Orleans, at Indiana, home against Phoenix, home against Detroit. That sounds like a lot of wins right there. And again, you got to go out and play the games. You got to be on your game. But if it could be this kind of confluence of, hey, Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo getting closer to being healthy, and a bunch of winnable games on the schedule. Now, after that, they go on a testy little 5-game road stretch towards the end of the season at Denver, at Brooklyn, at Philly, at Milwaukee, at Memphis. That will be challenging, but maybe they can get themselves into a good spot before that. Then they end 2 games at home against Brooklyn and Utah at the end of the season, 2 teams that will not be motivated to win at that point in the season. So a lot of bankable wins, which is why Basketball Reference thinks they will wind up the season as the number 5 seed in the West. That is a likely position for them based on where they are right now. Basketball Reference thinks they are a 69% chance of being a 1 through 6 seed, and that their most likely seeds are either 5 or 6, about equal weight on both of them, about 28% on both of those. So that tells you something. That tells you that there are better times ahead potentially for the Wolves if this is coming together the way you think it is, if they can get healthy, if they can take advantage of the schedule coming up ahead of them. Last but not least, in this first segment, Twins open their preseason schedule on Saturday. The bigger story in Major League Baseball, though, involves TV. MLB and ESPN mutually agreeing to opt out of their TV contract after this season. It was a 7-year deal signed in 2021, but they had an opt-out after this year, and they're exercising that. They did that before the March 1st deadline. What does that mean? It's an interesting time for baseball. I don't think this is great news for Major League Baseball. I'm sure they want to expand where they can have their games, things like that. I think this might mean a lot more games on streaming platforms, things like that. But they were going to get an estimated $550 million from ESPN for the rights to these games each of the next 3 years. That is no longer guaranteed income. And according to some stories I'm reading, that was above the market value they might be able to get now. So what does that say? It says that teams that are largely taking a hit on regional sports broadcasts from their local TV rights are now maybe going to take a hit again on their national TV rights. Now, if it's a little bit less and you split it between 30 teams, you're probably only talking about a handful of $1 million every year. But all of this adds up. Baseball's in kind of a precarious spot. Now, to their end, baseball doesn't think ESPN is promoting their sport right. They don't think that ESPN is taking them seriously. They don't think that they are getting the kind of the top billing on the network that they once did. So maybe a good time just in general for them to split, probably going to expand to a lot of different places, but this has been a partnership that's been pretty good for both sides for a long time. Both sides kind of left the option open that ESPN might take a smaller bit of the package to still have baseball on in some capacity, but opting out of this big piece of the deal for the final few years of it, that doesn't tell me that's a great thing for Major League Baseball. You don't do that if you think things are going great. You do that if one or both sides, and it sounds like both in this case, although probably ESPN more than MLB, doesn't feel like they're getting the value out of it that they should be. So watch for that in 2026 and beyond and how that impacts MLB finances. whether you believe it or not, whether you like it or not, the Major League Soccer season starts on Saturday, even though that's the middle towards the end of February. Jon Marthaler, why are they playing the game so early?
They got to get him in. How are you going to get in all the international games? You got 34 league games. You got the U.S. Open Cup, the Leagues Cup, the Champions Cup. And there's all sorts of cups. There were already MLS teams playing this week. Inter Miami played in Kansas City in 2-degree weather.
That's terrific. Good for them.
It's been good. It's time. It's been almost a week and a half, 2 weeks since the last game. It's time to get more in.
We talked about this last time you were on. The only month they don't play is January.
That's correct.
That's the only month.
Then, it's close. They want preseason the second week of January.
They wish they could. I think
they had a preseason scrimmage in January, if I'm not mistaken.
That's unbelievable. What are these guys like? Do they like? I don't know. I feel like I get more PTO than these guys do.
You know, back in the day with like baseball players, they'd come to spring training and a big story would be, all right, who you spent all off season working at a car dealership and drinking beer or whatever. There's literally no time for these soccer players to get out of shape. They would have to actively work to get out of shape between the seasons.
Yes, because the season never ends. They do draw a line between how you finished last year and how you finished this year, though, which is the reason we're talking right now. Minnesota United has its first game Saturday at LA. Home opener is a week from Saturday, at least technically in March, although it could be 12 degrees by then. We don't know. What do we think? I've got some musical comparisons for you, but first I want to hear what you think about the season.
In terms of how the Loons will do, there's been a lot of positivity about the Loons, and I'm not just talking about local, this could be the year kind of positivity, but nationally as well. It seems like the general expectations is that the Loons will be sort of in the best of the rest kind of status. Okay. And by the rest, I mean, I think it's universally accepted that everyone thinks the Los Angeles, the two LA teams and Seattle will be the class of the Western Conference. And a lot of people think the Loons will be up there. And so I think the key storyline for the season, I think, is can they make that next step where it's not just the best of the rest, but where they're competing with LA and the Galaxy and Seattle. If you look at last season, they played those teams 8 times and won 1 and drew 1. So not a great record against those 3 that were the class of the conference. Now, there's a lot that could happen. I think the Western Conference top to bottom is a little bit like the NBA Western Conference in terms of the top and the bottom are pretty close. And so we'll see who sort of comes out of that pile. But right now, the expectation is they're sort of that top 3. And the fact that Minnesota's starting at LAFC is sort of already a good barometer for where they're at.
You know, with notable exceptions, it does seem like best of the rest is kind of like how you describe 75% of every Minnesota team's outlook going into any season, does it not? Is this the year they finished 6th? I don't know.
I mean, maybe the Vikings managed to go 14-3 and still be just the best of the rest.
Best of the rest. We're the best of the rest here. Now I watched a movie a week or 2 ago called Piece by Piece, and that's my musical comparison for you. Piece by Piece is a documentary about musician and producer Pharrell Williams, and it's made with Lego animation. And of
course it is.
That sounds like it should never work, but it's actually a terrific movie. You don't realize how basically any good rap or R&B or even pop song that came out between 2003 and 2013 basically had his fingerprints on it. And he's still been successful beyond that, but it's a documentary about his life, his rise. But the Lego analogy and why they did the whole thing in Legos is A, he's a unique creative mind, but B, you got to put this thing together piece by piece. And you do feel a little bit like that is the case with Minnesota United, that they've kind of taken some steps. Last year they added some stuff, but that is still in building mode this year to where they hope to get to eventually.
I think that's accurate without being able to comment on what kind of Lego set they are. Like my kids, they do some Legos, but there's so many people who are much beyond that. What kind of Legos do you need to win MLS?
When I was growing up with Legos, you just got a big pile of Legos and you made whatever you had
was Legos.
And now you have like these elaborate things you're supposed to put together with the Legos. I don't like that. I feel like I feel like you should be able to do what you want with the Legos.
And it's like when you're putting them together, you feel like you should glue them together so they don't fall apart. Like my son makes Lego cars and then they immediately fall apart because they're made of Legos.
Yes.
And then you can't play with them anymore. It's a much worse car.
Now, to be fair, you are allowed to use more than 11 Legos like Adrian Heath used to use, but we'll see. What
exactly 11 Legos. No more Legos.
No more than 11. We got our starting 11. We have the way we assemble them, and then we're done.
That's right.
Okay, so as we're looking at this year's roster, as we're looking at second-year head coach Eric Ramsey, like what's new? What's the same? What do they want to try to build upon?
It's a lot the same, to be honest with you. They lost a couple of pieces from last year, but none of their significant contributors. And in terms of guys they brought in this year, they've got 3 youngish guys that they brought in, a guy from Korea, a guy from Argentina, and a guy from France. But 2 of them have hardly been here because they've been off getting their visas. And one, Ho Yeon-jung, the midfielder from Korea, is here and played in one of the preseason games, but he still is, getting up to speed with the team. He's in a situation where he's 24. He's in a country he's never been to that he doesn't speak the language. There's only one other guy around that speaks Korean. The fact that there even is a guy is a leg up on Sang-Bin Jung, who was the guy who came in 2 years ago where nobody was around to speak Korean. It's just, it's got to be a shock. And so expecting him to be an immediate contributor, I think, is too much to expect. Same for Nicholas Romero and Owen Jean, the other guys they brought in. They haven't even hardly been here. And so expecting contributions is probably too much to expect.
Well, we've written about that before too, but that is an interesting piece of the MLS puzzle, and maybe even the international soccer puzzle, where it's like, yeah, you bring in all of these guys from all over the place, and then it's like this very quick acclimation, but it's far more than just what happens on the field. A lot of these guys are in a brand new place very quickly because, like we said, the season never ends.
Yep, it all happens quickly, but it also has to build on itself as well, because it's pretty easy to just sort of get left behind.
So if they're at their best this year, what will be their strength or identity especially like what do we want to see in this first match Saturday?
Well, their strength and their identity is being solid defensively, and as much as they want to be a team that presses high and a team that Eric Ramsey is always at pains to say they want to be a team that can dominate in all phases, and that means sometimes having the ball and that means sometimes not having the ball. But he's always careful to say we're not going to be a team that makes 1,000 passes in a game, and so. They're not going to suddenly turn into, the LA Galaxy or a team that's going to hold the ball for most of the game. They're always going to, first and foremost, try to be solid defensively, guarding the spaces correctly. And then some of that is going to be trying to counterattack, and some of it is just going to be trying to take the ball smoothly out of defense to offense and not do that in a completely uncontrolled, chaotic way.
So, I mean, given that they do seem set up well to win on the road, which they were generally last year, but there was the humbling they got in the final playoff game. I was the final like 6-2 in that game, like 6-2, not great. We thought maybe they could win that game, and as it turns out, they were just 4 goals short. Was that an accurate representation of how far they still have to come? Was that a one-off? Like, how does that play into the outlook for this season?
I mean, I think that's a representation of the gulf they have to make up between them and the top teams, where it's one thing to play Real Salt Lake and get a whole bunch of 0-0 draws and win penalty shootout, or a 1-1 draw in their second game where they can win penalty shootouts. It's quite another thing to go and play a team as good as the Galaxy and be able to just go toe to toe with them. Like you said, there was a lot of sort of hope going into that game where some of their strengths really played into some of the Galaxy's weaknesses, and they thought, well, maybe they can do this, and this. And then, 90 seconds into the game, they were down 1-0 and chasing the game for the rest of the time. So they're, despite all of everything, they're still a young team too. So there's a lot of learning, and maybe getting your butt kicked at the Galaxy is a good learning experience in terms of building for future years.
True. So what else, what other pieces, if we may continue the tortured Lego analogy, are left to put into place? Because there's different addition windows, different transfer windows. It's not just, No, not like other sports where there's like you build your roster before the year starts, and then there's be a trade deadline where you add one or two people. Like there's a lot of different opportunities for them along the way, and certainly some things they'll probably either already know that they need or will need at some point.
Yeah, this winter transfer window, they got a lot done last summer where they brought in Kelvin Yeboah and they brought in Joaquin Pereira and they brought in Jefferson Diaz, 3 guys who went almost straight into the starting lineup. This winter has been, when you're building Legos, if we're going to keep going with this Lego analogy, you start building the Legos and you do all this little detail stuff, and then 10 steps later, you've completely covered up and you can't see it anymore. And it's almost frustrating where it's like, why don't you just... Why did I do all this work for nothing that you can see in the final product?
Right.
This winter was a little bit like that. Not exactly like that, but a little bit in the sense that it felt like they were building stuff like roster flexibility. They had Timu Pukki, who was a designated player, who they ended up, he went back to Finland. They've built a lot of flexibility in terms of the roster. They've brought in young guys, 2 of whom are part of this under 22 initiative that gives them some extra flexibility with how they pay those transfer fees and how they pay those guys, and gives them a lot of things that are set up for the future rather than like last summer, bringing in guys who are going to contribute right now.
So if I might talk about a team that I talk a little bit more about on this podcast, which is the Vikings, I feel like the 2025 Vikings, last year's success notwithstanding, I feel like the Vikings should be good in 2025, but when in terms of competing truly for a championship, this feels like for the Vikings, the year before the year, we should start taking that seriously. Is that still where we are with the Loons? Like, this isn't a championship team, but they're starting to put some of those kind of the progress towards that. If things go well, this is the year before the year that they should really be competitive.
Well, I think that's especially an interesting question when you've got as many young guys as they do. It's not quite where it's like, oh, they've got a lot of veterans, but they also have a lot of total question marks. They've got guys like Kelvin Yeboah, who came in, got 9 goals in 12 games last fall, but still has a lot to prove for the future. And so you sort of look at guys like him, Joaquin Pereira especially, who did not jump off the field or anything at you in terms of how he performed last year, but now has a full off season here, is with the team and a little more comfortable. As much as anything about how that's going to be this year is, can those guys not only be starters, not only be guys you can plug into a starting lineup in MLS, but can they be really excellent guys in MLS? Can those guys take another step? And, there's some young guys that it's a little more of a lottery ticket, but there's a lot of guys where you can say, well, if everybody raises their game a little bit and everybody gets into a situation that maybe they can excel at, then maybe this can come together into something that's a little bit of a bigger deal. And like I say, the people who commentate nationally are putting them in sort of tiers with the Galaxy. And this is Matt Doyle, who's one of the main MLS writers, put him in a tier as a serious contender alongside the Galaxy, which, that means they're, at least from what other people are looking at, more objective people who aren't there every day are saying they're thereabouts in terms of competing for stuff.
Final thing, John, how are they even able to function this preseason without any sort of Emmanuel Reynoso drama? Do we miss that? We miss that, don't we? Well,
there's going to be something. At some point, there'll be something, right? Like, just yesterday, it came out that the UK bookmakers had made Eric Ramsey the favorite to take the job at Swansea City. So, I would be entirely shocked if that happened. However, by the time this podcast comes out, maybe we know more. I don't know. But that would be, like I say, it would be a huge shock, but maybe that could be the drama. I mean, what would it be like if Minnesota United had a coach for the entire season, like the preseason and the season?
I don't know. Well, forever it was Heath, but you're right. Ramsey didn't come until a little bit later last year. It's okay.
Turns out it was fine. They made the playoffs.
Yeah.
Who needs a coach for the preseason?
Getting your act together before the year is overrated. They proved last year.
Yeah, well, overrated.
We'll see where being a little bit more focused and intentional gets them this season. Starts Saturday against LA. John, appreciate it as always. Sorry I had to bring more music into it, but we do what we can, and we'll talk to you soon.
At least it was Lego music and not David Lee Roth this time.
At least. All right. Thanks, John.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate-saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
Great stuff from Jon. As usual, we bring in tortured musical metaphors multiple times now, this time, of course, Pharrell Williams. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Big one for Minnesota United. Again, they open the season Saturday against LAFC. We will get a good idea of their strength right off the bat. Let's finish with the cooler. Another team that plays Saturday. Nobody was playing for like a week, and now everybody's playing, so good for them. Ken writes in about the Gophers men's basketball team and the segment I think I did with Lavelle E. Neal on Thursday's show where we talked about Ben Johnson. He said, regarding Ben, I think you're wrong to doubt his ability to get the team to the next level. To me, he's demonstrated a fine ability to coach. He's had to take basically a new team every year, work with talent that, for the most part, isn't top tier, and make the team win somehow. No easy task, and this year looked awful until it didn't. That he could hold the team together and get it to win after such a tough start is admirable. He knows how to identify talent. Hawkins, Payne, and even Christie were all undervalued or largely missed by most programs. Patterson seems similar this year. Sounds like a good trio coming in next year, so let's say he's fired. You want to bring in a bigger name coach? Probably, right? What is that coach going to demand before signing? A bigger contract than Ben's, more NIL guarantees, and probably a few other things. If that new hire gets NIL guarantees, why not offer Ben similar improved support? Good chance Payne and Hawkins would still be here if Ben had NIL to offer. I never heard reports they didn't like the U. I don't blame the players for chasing the money because nothing is guaranteed, even though I hate it what it's done to the game. I love that Dawson stayed, and I think that's a statement about his belief in Ben as well as a desire to help the program. Ken, thanks for writing in. I think these are good points and ones that Lavelle and I generally agreed upon on Thursday. I think my larger point is this. You can't stay on this treadmill in seasons where they're better than we thought they would be, only take you so far. I agree. He has not had enough support, enough NIL money. That has completely changed the game. So I think the conversation we need to have is if you are going to increase NIL support, if you are going to give a decent amount of this revenue sharing that starts next year to the Gophers men's basketball team, is Ben Johnson the guy to get you to the next level? And I think the answer to that is incomplete at best. I think what Ben Johnson has shown is that he can rally a team, that he can get a team to play hard, and that does go a long way. What I don't necessarily see is a team that is becoming something elite. I see a team that will keep fighting and keep playing hard. That is not a program, though, that is going to get to NCAA tournament after NCAA tournament. So I think that's the question they have to ask themselves this offseason, because I agree. You can bring in a new coach, you can give them NIL guarantees, and then you can ask, well, why didn't you do that for Ben Johnson? And if your answer is, we didn't think that that was the right thing to do with that coach, we think we're in a better spot now, then you have to live with that answer. If you think, hey, with more support, Ben Johnson could get this team to the next level, then you have to go that way. So I get what you're saying. I get the argument here. I don't think he's been put in the best position by any stretch of the imagination with the support he's had, with the way college basketball has shifted, where Minnesota sits in that landscape. I think the bigger question now is he the guy to get you to the next level if the support gets better? And I'm not sure if we know the answer to that question yet. So, Ken, thanks for writing in. Appreciate listening. Appreciate you bringing in a thoughtful perspective to that. And again, we don't have to know the answer to this yet because they have 5 regular season games left. If they go 4-1 down the stretch of this Big Ten season and go 10-10 after starting 0-6, maybe that nudges me to the finish line with Ben Johnson. If they lose 4 out of these 5, a bunch of which are winnable games, including tomorrow against Penn State, maybe that changes our opinion in the other direction. We will see, but there is still a lot of season left to make that determination. And that will do it for me today. Royce back with me on Monday. Thank goodness we've got a lot of games to talk about, so it should be a great show coming up. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Have a great rest of your Friday. Back at it again tomorrow.